comprehensive care for men, and especially the men and women, but mostly men who serve as first responders and keep us safe in the East Bay. Okay, so this is what the public imagines, right? They imagine that every day firemen bring, beautiful women out of burning buildings over your shoulders, or people in California have this perception that police officers live this charmed life that they saw on Chips way back in the day. But I know from talking to my patients that this is what guys are experiencing now. Police officers are exhausted. Firemen are doing hours and hours of overtime, and they're feeling exhausted. They're not feeling appreciated like they should be, and that really takes a toll. So this comes from officer.com, which is an online law enforcement magazine. And so by the nature of police work, officers are frequently under both physical and mental stress. And now more than ever, it's become worse. And stressful environments affect hormone responses, leading to a decrease in testosterone and a decrease in increase in cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And studies have actually found that the free testosterone levels in police officers is less than the general population. And part of that is because law enforcement officers face risks associated with suboptimal sleep hygiene and nutritional habits due to demanding shift work and overtime these days. So, why is my testosterone low? I'm a relatively young, relatively healthy man. I have a job that requires physical fitness, but for whatever reason, when we look at testosterone levels in first responders, it's lower than it really should be. And for example, I have patients who have dozens of hours of mandatory overtime that cuts into sleep, it cuts into exercise time, it cuts into social time, relaxation time with family and friends. There's a lower job satisfaction that folks are experiencing. My patients who are police officers in San Francisco tell me that for every 15 officers that they're training, 50 leave the force every month. There's a compassion fatigue that goes on that, you're so fed up and so tired and so overwhelmed that it's hard to be compassionate to the people that you serve. And we're all still recovering from COVID. COVID really took its toll on first responders, disproportionately. So let's first talk about what actually is testosterone. Testosterone's a hormone. Okay, what is a hormone? A hormone is a chemical messenger that goes through the bloodstream, travels from one organ to another. And testosterone is a hormone that's made by the testicles. And it's essential to the development of men and causes masculine characteristics. So, when you're 12 and you're pre-pubertal, your testosterone is maybe 200. And then when you're after puberty, your testosterone level is 800-900. And you develop your penis, you develop your testicles, your voice gets lower, you grow facial and pubic hair, your muscles build and increase in strength, your bones grow and increase in strength, you develop sex drive or libido, you produce sperm, and you have better, more aggressive mood. So those are the things that testosterone does for us naturally. Okay, now it's a little known fact that both men and women have both testosterone and estrogen. So you can see on the graph on the left that those start to accelerate, in your mid-teens, and testosterone stays high in men and gradually declines over time. And we're going to talk about that. But when you compare men to women, men have 8-fold more testosterone floating around in their bloodstream than women do. And men use 20-fold more testosterone than women do. So not only are your levels higher, but you're making more. Now, women are a little bit more sensitive to the effects of testosterone. And so a little bit of testosterone goes a longer way in women, but in general, men have much higher levels of testosterone. Now, men also have levels of estrogen, And estrogen is really important in bone health and also, being sensitive. You don't want to walk around like a caveman with all testosterone, no estrogen. You want to have some estrogen that bring out some of your female characteristics. When you're doing a traffic stop, you want to be kind to people. When you're, interacting with people, you don't want to be pure testosterone. You want to have some estrogen. And so that's why there's a balance between testosterone and estrogen in men and women. Now, what labs do we typically check in men who we suspect of having low testosterone? Well, first of all, of course, you check testosterone, but you also check a free testosterone. And I'll be talking in a little bit about what a free testosterone is. And we check that first thing in the morning. So if you look at the graph on the right, testosterone levels peak at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning and then slowly decline until about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when they hit their lowest point. And they don't start to climb back up until you sleep. And so we'll talk about the importance of sleep in a bit, but this is the reason why when you check a testosterone level in a man, you want to make sure that you check it first thing in the morning. And when you bottom out at around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when you typically get your afternoon cup of coffee, or you need some sort of boost because your testosterone levels are bottoming out because you've used most of the testosterone or the free testosterone that's floating around in your bloodstream. Now, you also want to check an estrogen level, and you want to check a PSA because, as we'll see in just a minute, testosterone can have effects on the prostate. It causes some prostate growth. It does not cause prostate cancer, but it does cause some growth of the prostate. And if you have aggressive prostate cancer, it can cause an acceleration of growth of prostate cancer. So it's always important to check at least once a year a PSA if you're on testosterone. You also need to check your hematocrit or your hemoglobin levels, because if you're replacing testosterone, it can cause an increase in the hematocrit or hemoglobin level. You also want to check a thyroid function test, a liver function test, and a B12, because some of those conditions, like if you have a very low thyroid, it can trick your clinician into thinking that you have low testosterone, but in actuality, your symptoms are caused by a low thyroid. Or if you have a B12 deficit, you can have symptoms of low testosterone, even though your testosterone isn't necessarily low. And thyroid replacement or B12 replacement are super easy things to do. And so it's important to rule out some of those conditions before you put someone on testosterone. Okay, so testosterone declines as we get older. So it peaks around the age of 20 to 30. Your testosterone levels should be anywhere between 800 and 1,000, right? This is what gives you energy, gives you drive, gives you libido, gives you strength. And then every year after that, it typically declines about 1 or 2%. But there's a lot of variability. And in general, when you look at normal testosterone levels for men now versus 50 years ago, there's about a 30% societal decline in testosterone. And so why would that be? Well, first of all, we eat a lot of processed food. There are a lot of plastics and environmental contaminants in our environment. But the other thing is that in general, as a society, we're much more sedentary than we were 50 years ago, right? So think about it this way. Your body only makes what it needs. So if you're a hunter and you're out on the plains killing buffalo with your bare hands or with a bow and arrow, you're going to need a lot of testosterone. So your testosterone may be at 1,000. If you're a farmer and you're working the fields, you're not killing buffalo, but you're working really hard in physical work, you're going to need a lot of testosterone, but not necessarily as much as a hunter. So maybe your testosterone is 750 or 800. If you sit in front of a computer all day, sitting at a desk, and no one is threatening you or causing any anxiety or your heart rate to go up, maybe all the testosterone you need is 400 or 500. And I think that's why testosterone levels in general are lower than they used to be. Now, you saw the way that testosterone declines. This is muscular strength, right? This is bench press, squat, and I think clean and jerk. And these are the world record by age. And you can see your strength peaks at the age of 25, even if you're a highly, highly trained athlete. And every year after that, it declines, right? And one of the reasons that it peaks at age 25 is when we overlay strength versus testosterone, there's an exact perfect correlation between those two curves. So you can see that an important part of strength is testosterone levels. And so this is something that we can either stabilize or reverse by improving testosterone levels. Okay, so if you're a first responder, why do you need testosterone? Well, first of all, you do a physical job. You don't sit behind a desk every day. You know, you do things that require physical fitness, lifting, running, pulling hoses, chasing bad guys. And so part of your job requires physical strength. In addition, you need to be alert, right? So, you know, if you're in a fire or in a difficult situation as a police officer or a corrections officer or an EMT or in the military, you need alertness. You can't be dozing on the job, or sometimes you can't have a minute or two off. You have to be on the job, you know, 100%. And that can be even a life or death situation if you mentally lapse. And so that's why testosterone is really important. The other thing is, if you're a police officer, the bad guys that you're chasing in general are going to be 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds, and their testosterone levels are going to be 900. So if you're a police officer and your testosterone level is 350 or 400, and you're going to have to fight or chase a bad guy whose testosterone levels are 900 or 1,000, and then they're amped up on methamphetamines or whatever they're doing, and their anxiety is up, they got adrenaline going, you are at a big disadvantage. And that actually can be a life-threatening situation. And I've had police officers tell me that they've been in situations where, you know, thank goodness that they had their testosterone boosted, because if they didn't have their testosterone boosted and they didn't have that aggressiveness that you get from testosterone, things might not have ended so well for them. Okay. The other thing is, everyone else is freaking out, but you have to be calm, right? Testosterone gives you that confidence that comes out when you need to be calm when everyone else is anxious or freaking out. The other thing is, you carry a lot of equipment, right? I don't carry a 60-pound pack on my back when I'm in the office, but you know, you guys carry your duty belts, you carry packs, you carry hoses. And so it's really a very physical job. When you have a physical job, you need testosterone. And it's difficult to sleep. I have a lot of patients who are first responders who are ex-military, have PTSD, or even have PTSD from situations that they've encountered in the course of their day. I get all sorts of stories from first responders about, you know, crazy situations they've been in or crazy things that they've seen that really would affect your sleep, because when you sleep, and we'll see that in a minute, you process things psychologically. And if you're seeing disturbing things out there on the streets of San Francisco or Oakland or Hayward, or, you know, wherever else you're first responder, that can certainly affect your sleep. So this is why you need testosterone. This is why this webinar is so important. Okay, so if you're the guy on the left with low testosterone, it affects your mood. You know, you're more likely to be depressed or sad. You're going to be tired. You're going to lose focus. You're going to grow man boobs because your testosterone is turning into estrogen, and estrogen will give you man boobs. Your muscle mass will decline, your abdominal fat will increase, your libido will go down, and your athletic performance will decline. Now, on the other hand, if you replace your testosterone and your testosterone is elevated, you know, if going from a low testosterone to a higher testosterone, your mood will improve, your confidence will improve. Testosterone is actually very, very good for heart health. It's very good for preventing diabetes. You improve muscle mass, you decrease body fat. It's really good for libido, and it's really good for athletic performance. That's why Olympic athletes and cyclists and football players try to cheat the system by going to super physiologic doses of testosterone, levels of testosterone that are super high. Okay, so testosterone is a steroid hormone. When people talk about steroids, what are they talking about? They're talking about hormones that are based on the structure of a cholesterol molecule. And I don't want to turn this into a biochemistry talk, but cholesterol is a 27 carbon structure that other hormones are built on. So when you start with cholesterol, you can either end up with aldosterone, which is a hormone that affects blood pressure and electrolytes and affects the kidneys. You can end up with cortisol. That's our main stress hormone or chronic stress hormone. You can end up with testosterone, which is the main male hormone. You can end up with estrogen, and you can also end up with progesterone. So those are really the 5 main steroid hormones. So when people talk about steroids, it's one of those 5 hormones or a derivative of those hormones, which are all based on the structure of cholesterol. Cholesterol is the building block that we use to create those hormones. Okay, so testosterone, where does testosterone come from? Okay, you have a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. Okay, and the hypothalamus has a thermostat for determining the level of testosterone in the body. This is a really, really, really important concept. And I want you to understand this because this is the key to understanding testosterone regulation and the prevention of side effects. Okay, so the hypothalamus sends a hormone called GnRH, gonadotropin. So gonad is either a testicle or an ovary. Tropin means growth. So gonadotropin. So hypothalamus releases GnRH to the pituitary. Now, the pituitary is a little gland that sits right behind the upper bridge of the nose, very close to the hypothalamus. And the pituitary produces 2 hormones, LH and FSH. And this is true both in men and in women. You know, the effects in women are different than the effects in men, but the hormones are exactly the same. Okay. Now, FSH tells the testicle to make sperm, and LH tells the testicle to make testosterone. Okay. And then there's a negative feedback loop. So the amount of testosterone in the body is detected by the hypothalamus. And when you reach a certain level, the hypothalamus says, okay, enough. We're going to stop making testosterone, at least for now, until we get another reading of testosterone in our body. And if that's low, then we'll kick on the machinery by sending out GnRH. Okay. So this negative feedback loop affects how much testosterone you make. It also affects how much sperm you make, right? Because the sperm don't swim through the bloodstream and go up to the brain, and your brain doesn't count the number of sperm. The brain looks at how much testosterone is being made and then extrapolates that in terms of how much sperm is being made. So your testosterone levels basically determine your sperm production. So now say you bring in testosterone from the outside. What happens? Well, your hypothalamus says, oh, we got enough testosterone. I'm going to shut off the GnRH, which then shuts off the LH and FSH production. And when you don't have FSH, guess what? You don't make sperm. So I've seen a number of men, young men, especially first responders, who get testosterone and DHT derivatives, you know, performance enhancing drugs from their gym bros, and they inject themselves or they take these medications, and then they come to me 5 years later, they're infertile. Their testicle function is destroyed. They've messed up their livers. They've got elevated red blood cell counts, and they've had problems based on that. And, you know, that's because you're shutting down the testicles. And when you shut down the testicles, you become infertile. And sometimes that's a permanent situation. And you shut down the testicle production and your testicle shrinks. I had a patient who was an all-pro defensive player for the Raiders for 15 years. Giant, 350-pound guy. His testicles were the size of peas because he wasn't doing what he needed to do to protect his testicular function. Okay, so I don't want that to be you. Okay, now when your body makes testosterone, a couple of things can happen to it. One, it can be inactivated by the liver. The liver metabolizes and breaks testosterone down. Most of the testosterone goes to the muscles, and your muscles use the testosterone to build new muscles and repair old muscles. Some testosterone is converted by an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase into dihydrotestosterone. And we'll talk about DHT in a little bit. And some of the testosterone is aromatized and turned into estrogen. Okay, so let's keep going. Now, let's talk about testosterone and estrogen. Men are from Mars, right, the red planet, and women are from Venus. But the difference between testosterone and estrogen is a single hydrogen atom. So the smallest unit of matter there is, a single hydrogen atom, so one neutron, one proton, one electron is the difference between men and women. And so that's why it's easy for your body to convert testosterone into estrogen, because all it has to do is add a single hydrogen. And so when we're replacing testosterone, it's really important that we block the conversion of testosterone to estrogen, and we do that with an aromatase enzyme called anastrozole. So a small amount of anastrozole will block the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. The other thing you can do is use something called DIM. DIM comes from cruciferous vegetables like broccoli or cauliflower, and that also has some effects blocking the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. Not nearly as powerful as anastrozole, but a little bit more natural. Okay. Now, let's talk for a second about bioidentical testosterone versus synthetic testosterone. On the left, you can see the natural testosterone molecule. That's the molecule that humans make that is in our body that activates the testosterone receptor. And if you look at the left side of the molecule and the left side of testosterone cypionate and testosterone ethanoate, they're exactly the same. So think of it like a key, right? The key part of testosterone, natural testosterone, testosterone cypionate, and testosterone ethanoate is the same. The other part of the key, the part that you hold, is different. So natural testosterone, testosterone cypionate, testosterone ethanoate all activate the testosterone receptor the same, but natural testosterone is what your body makes. It also is made by yams, wild yams, actually. I think that's why they're wild, and soy. And so when you get pellets, testosterone pellets, they actually isolate the testosterone from wild yams and soy and put that into the pellets. Whereas if you're getting testosterone shots, like testosterone cypionate and testosterone ethanoate, that's lab grown. And so they have to have a different chemical structure for whatever reason than natural testosterone. And that's what bioidentical or human identical testosterone is versus lab grown. Okay, so if your testosterone level is low, and if you're having signs and symptoms of low testosterone, so say your testosterone is 200, but you feel great, you're sexually active, you're putting on muscle, you're not fat, you're active, you're sleeping well, you don't have any aches or pains, there's absolutely no reason for you to replace testosterone. Now, say your testosterone is 500, and you've checked the thyroid, and you're sleeping okay, and you're eating okay, and your B12 level's okay, and so all these things are okay, but your energy level is low, you're having difficulty putting on muscle, you're putting on fat, your libido is low, you would be a great candidate for testosterone. And so, the actual level is important, but not it's not what drives the clinical decision to replace testosterone. That what drives the clinical decision is, how do you feel? Are you going to get benefit from replacing testosterone to elevated levels? Okay, so you can't take testosterone as a typical pill, because if you take it as a typical pill, it gets into the stomach, it gets into the intestine, it goes to the liver, and it goes through what's called first pass metabolism, and the liver will break down testosterone. There's an increased risk of liver cancer, and there's not much testosterone actually gets into the bloodstream. Now, there are new testosterone preparations that actually get into the bloodstream through the lymphatic system. So the new oral testosterones actually get into the bloodstream, but through a different way that the old testosterone preparations. So there are now oral testosterone preparations. There are gels, there are patches, there are skin creams. But think about it this way. You saw testosterone is based on a 27 carbon structure. So it's a pretty big molecule. Think about H2O, water. Say you jump into a swimming pool. Do you become super waterlogged right away? Of course not. Your skin keeps water out, but water is just H2O. It's a really small molecule. So how do you expect a 27 carbon steroid to get through the skin? Now, these preparations use what are called carrier gels. So they're molecules that grab onto testosterone and pull it through the skin, but it doesn't do that at a very high level. You would need massive amounts of gel or creams in order to get testosterone levels that are to the level where I would consider appropriate, that it would have a significant effect on a first responder. The two preparations that I like best are either injection therapy, which gets through the skin and into the muscle and then into the bloodstream, or pellets. And we'll talk about pellets in just a sec, but they're basically just like little canisters of testosterone with little holes poked in, and the testosterone slowly leaks out of the pellets over a period of 4 to 6 months. So let's look closely at all these different preparations. So on the graph on the left is testosterone levels. Okay, and I'm a little bit unconventional, because most conventional physicians that you go to will tell you, let's get your testosterone into a normal level. Okay, and when you look at your lab results, the normal level typically is reported as 250 to 950. So there's a massive interpretation of what normal testosterone is. And unless you're down in the 250s or 200, most physicians will not consider replacing testosterone. And I know for a fact at Kaiser Permanente, they will not replace testosterone unless it's under 300. Okay, but if you're chasing bad guys or putting out fires, 300 is not enough. 350 is not enough. 400 is not enough. 500 may not even be enough, right? These are activities that require high levels of energy and muscular strength. And if your testosterone is low, you're not going to be effective in these jobs, right? So if you look at patches, gels, creams, nasal preparations, oral preparations, subcutaneous preparations, they're all going to give you a level of around 500. If you're coming in with a level of 400, it's not going to give you much benefit, because remember, it's not additive. Remember the negative feedback loop. For any testosterone you take, your body's going to make less. So if your testosterone level is 400 and you take a nasal spray or a gel that's going to get you up to 500, that's all it's going to get you. It's not going to get you 400 plus 5. So then if you keep going, if you look at the rectal preparations, they actually can give you higher levels. The only problem is you have to put a testosterone pellet in your rectum 3 times a day. And most of us with normal jobs don't have time to do that. So what's the alternative? The alternative is injection therapy or pellets, because you're bypassing the skin, you're going below the skin into the muscle or subcutaneous fat, and you're causing the release of testosterone at a set level. Okay. And then on the right, you can take a look at the costs. So in general, transdermal preparations are around $2,000 a year. Shots are the least expensive. So if you're doing injection therapy, you should only be paying about $500 a year for the testosterone. And if you're doing pellets, pellets run about $2,000 a year, depending on how many times you need to be implanted. Okay, so let's talk for a second about pellets. Pellets typically are inserted every 4 to 6 months. I use what are called BioT pellets, which I think are the best pellets. And I aim to achieve a level of around 1,000 to 1,400. So there's an algorithm that we use that we put in the height, weight, how much muscle you have. And then we can determine pretty closely how many pellets we need to get you to a certain level. And I'll shoot between 1,000 and 1,400. The main downside of pellet placement is that you'll have some glute soreness for about typically 3 or 4 days. So if you're doing a 3 on, 4 off, or a 4 on, 3 off, typically do it on the first day of your off schedule. And then by the time the glute soreness goes away, you'll be back and ready to work. Now, I have a lot of first responders who have a percentage of body fat that's less than 15%. And since these pellets live in the subcutaneous tissue, sometimes you can have more soreness, or you can actually feel the pellets if you have a low percentage of body fat. And for those folks, there's a smaller pellet, 100 milligram pellet, that gives you much less soreness, and you won't be able to feel the pellets as easily. And the main disadvantage of that is you need to replace them about every 3 months instead of every 4 to 6 months. But my patients who have a lower percentage of body fat and higher muscle mass will much prefer those pellets. Okay. What about shots? Shots are either testosterone cypionate or testosterone ethanoate, and that comes as 200 milligrams per cc. Okay. And a typical dose will be about 100 to 200 milligrams per week. Now, I've had patients who are bodybuilders or, training for sports. They'll go up to 400, even 500 a week. I wouldn't recommend that. Okay. 100 to 200 is typically more than adequate for a normal guy. Now, the half-life of this medication is 4.5 days. And the elimination is 8.5 days. And I've seen patients come in and they'll inject themselves every 2 weeks. That's totally unacceptable, right? Because your peaks are way too high and then it will drop way too low. So I typically have my patients inject themselves twice a week. I have some patients that'll inject once a week, but typically I prefer twice a week because the peaks aren't as high and the troughs aren't as low. And it's an intramuscular injection. We sell the bottles at the office for $120 for a 10 cc bottle. There are a lot of online services like Helix, like HealthVault, like TRT Nation. Most of them will rip you off. They charge you anywhere from $200 to $400 a month for something that costs them a lot less. And they'll charge you for lab tests. Lab tests aren't that much, to check out testosterone in my office is $60. So, please don't get ripped off by these online services. They don't really know you. They don't see you. They don't care about you like a doctor who actually sees you in person would care for you, and will be able to pick up if you have any issues or problems from the testosterone. And this is a Schedule 3 controlled substance, so it's actually very actively monitored, and we need special codes. And just like prescribing pain medication, all of this is monitored. Okay. So let's talk for a second about testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, because DHT is a really important molecule. DHT is critical for differentiation of the external genitalia like penis and scrotum and prostate in developing babies. And this is why when guys are taking Propecia or finasteride for hair growth, it's really important not to have your partner who may be pregnant to touch any of this stuff, because blocking the production of DHT can cause very significant problems with development of a baby. Okay, so that's just, let me put that out there. Okay, in an adult, DHT has a higher binding affinity. Okay, so look at the picture in the middle. There's an androgen receptor. Androgen is like the same thing as a testosterone receptor. And testosterone will activate the androgen receptor by fitting into that androgen receptor. But dihydrotestosterone is a slightly different molecule. You can take a look on the bottom right and look at the molecular structure of DHT versus testosterone. And it has a slightly better match to the androgen receptor than testosterone does. And so it will is more effective in activating the testosterone receptor. And that's why it's used as a performance enhancing drug. And we'll see that in just a second. But in normal male adults, DHT causes growth of prostate. It causes activity of sebaceous or skin glands, and it also causes male hair pattern and baldness. And so it does all these wonderful things, include growing nose hair, ear hair. As a adult, it would be nice to have a little bit lower DHT and a little bit more testosterone. Okay, so let me talk to you about bodybuilding steroid hormones, right? In order to be like Ben Pakulski, my friend, who I've done a bunch of podcasts with and does a podcast called Muscle Intelligence, if you want to listen to a really good podcast about bodybuilding and muscular hypertrophy. But you can't look like Ben without steroids, okay? And when people talk about taking performance-enhancing drugs or performance-enhancing steroids, what they're talking about are derivatives of either testosterone, DHT, or 19-NORs. Now, first of all, I would stay away from 19-NORs, like categorically stay away from tren, okay? Because it can permanently ruin your hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis. And I've seen patients who took tren for 6 months or more and were no longer able to make testosterone on their own. Okay, so knock off the 19-NORs. Now, what are really effective bodybuilding hormones are the DHT derivatives, like what are the common ones? Anavar, Anadrol, Winstrol, which is also called stanozol, DHB or dihydro. They're all hard to pronounce, but these are the ones that in the bodybuilding gyms they give out like candy. But these, for most normal folks, unless you want to look like Ben, I would stay away from the DHT derivatives. I would really just focus on testosterone, right? And most of these, or all these bodybuilders, they'll start with a testosterone base, and then based on what they want to do, they'll add a DHT derivative. Because remember, when I showed a slide earlier about these steroid hormones, some of them have a similarity to glucocorticoids like cortisol or androstenedione. So they have similarities to aldosterone. So if you have a similarity to aldosterone, it affects how much fluid you take on, right? If you're similar to cortisol, there's some effects of stress hormones. So you can basically, by altering the chemical structure of these DHT derivatives, you can get either bulking, or you can get water weight off, or you can get water weight on. But for the purposes of what most first responders need, just testosterone is more than adequate. Okay, Now, what are the downsides of testosterone replacement therapy, right? We've talked about a lot of the upsides, and the downsides are really why you don't want to get this stuff from gym bros. It's because if you take testosterone and you don't take something to block that negative feedback loop, you'll have shrinking testicles. And so what I'll typically do is I'll put my patients on clomiphene or Clomid. If they're interested in fertility, I'll put them on HCG, or you can take gonadorelin, which is that gonadotrophin releasing hormone. Okay, so there is a way to protect your testicle function from withering away. And that's really important when you're on testosterone. Because if your testicles wither away, then you become infertile, right? And a lot of police officers are at the age where they want to, and firemen are where they want to have kids. And so it's important to go on either clomiphene, but more likely HCG or gonadorelin to protect fertility. Okay, the other thing you can happen is you can have increased estrogen levels, right? So, your testosterone's really high, but you're driving down the road in your car, blasting Celine Dion on your way to the Barbra Streisand concert, right? So you don't want to be that guy. So we'll put you on anastrozole, a very small dose of anastrozole, because remember, it's important to have some estrogen. You don't want to be, running around like a caveman, or you can put someone on DIM. Okay, male pattern baldness. This is an issue with putting someone on testosterone because remember, it turns into DHT, and DHT has a higher binding affinity and affects the receptors in the scalp. And so I put my patients on minoxidil. Sometimes I'll put them on finasteride, but it's not a medication I really like because it affects libido and it can even affect erectile function. I put them on biotin. Biotin's a supplement, 2 grams a day, helps with hair. I put them on a red light, near infrared light helmet called the Theradome or the Capillus, and even PRP injections in the scalp will help stimulate the growth of hair. So, if you want to keep your Fabio-like hair, for me, it's too late, but if you want to keep your Fabio-like hair, then it's possible, but there are a couple things that you need to do. Okay, another thing that testosterone will do is it'll boost your hematocrit or your red blood cell count. And so it's important to keep track of that because if it gets too high, it can become a problem, right? Have I seen it become a problem? Very rarely. Although I did have a patient come to me, he was getting testosterone from a gym bro and he wanted to convert over to my office. I said, I need you to get labs first thing. I'm not going to touch you until I know what your situation is. His hematocrit came back at 60, right? Normal is like 35 to 45. His was 60. I texted him. I said, I need you to give 2 units of blood at American Cross right away. He didn't listen to me. 2 days later, he ended up at Kaiser Hospital with a blood clot in his liver that then went to his intestines and he infarcted his intestines. Last I heard, he was being airlifted to Stanford for emergency surgery. Right. So this does happen. This happened to some Belgian cyclists who were using EPO or erythropoietin to artificially increase their red blood cell count. Right. So if you increase your red blood cell count, you increase your oxygen carrying capacity. Right. So these guys, their hematocrit was like high 50s. Then they were in a bike race where they went up, a giant mountain. And at the top of the mountain, they were so dehydrated that their hematocrits were 70 and they had strokes. Right. So you don't want to be a 25-year-old cyclist who has a stroke and lost function of your legs or your arms or whatever. So it's important to monitor your hematocrit. That's why it's important to do this at a doctor's office. Don't do it on your own. It can also cause prostate growth. Remember, DHT causes prostate growth. So if you're boosting testosterone and some of that testosterone turns into DHT, then you can cause growth of the prostate. Now, it absolutely does not cause prostate cancer, but over time, it can cause growth of the prostate, and that may make it difficult for you to urinate, or you may urinate every hour, or you may have to urinate really urgently, or you may have difficulty emptying your bladder. So it's important to check your prostate. And then the other thing is it'll give you oily skin or acne. So if you were predisposed to that, had a lot of that when you were a teenager, it's probably going to come back, right? Boosting testosterone in a guy whose testosterone is 300 and pushing it up to 1,000 is like putting you through puberty once again. So I went through all of the negative side effects of testosterone, but I showed you that if things are properly managed, you shouldn't really have any major side effects of testosterone. Okay. What about a younger guy, maybe in his 20s, early 30s, that doesn't want to go on testosterone replacement or is concerned about fertility for good reason? We can use a molecule called N-clomiphene, right? So N-clomiphene is a selective estrogen receptor modulator, and it's very similar to clomiphene or Clomid, right? So clomiphene is a combination of N-clomiphene and Zu-clomiphene, but really what you want is the effectiveness of N-clomiphene. The reason I typically use regular clomiphene to prevent the testicle from shrinking is regular clomiphene is a lot less expensive than N-clomiphene. N-clomiphene is a higher level of purity, and at the levels that I'm using it, you're not going to get a lot of the side effects. But if you look at the graph on the left, right, the bottom line is placebo. The middle line is testosterone gel. Remember, I told you testosterone gel doesn't get you very high. But if you put someone on N-clomiphene, you can get to 450, 500. I've even seen patients go to 800 or 900. So if you decide, like, listen, testosterone replacement isn't for me, but I want something to boost my testosterone more naturally, N-clomiphene is a really good option. It does require a well-functioning testicle, so we need to check some extra labs like an LH and an FSH, because if the testicle isn't capable of producing enough testosterone, then N-clomiphene is not going to work. But it works by blocking the negative feedback loop, and you can see that in the image in the bottom right. Okay, so let me talk more generally about building muscle, because this is, critical for first responders, and a lot of the reason that first responders use testosterone and testosterone replacement is to build muscles. Okay, so when you build muscle, you activate what's called a satellite cell. Satellite cell is a stem cell for muscle. And then those satellite cells become myoblasts, and then myotubes, and then muscular fibers. And you can see that on the left. And you can either get what's called hypertrophy, which is the growth of the actual cell, or hyperplasia, which is an increase in the number of cells. But what you really want is a combination of hypertrophy and hyperplasia. Okay. And as you get older, you lose muscle. That's sarcopenia is a fancy word for losing muscle, right? And so we don't use our muscles as much as we did when we were younger. Our nerves begin to atrophy. They don't work quite as well as they used to. Our testosterone levels decline. We don't eat as much protein. We don't eat as many vitamins and minerals, and the absorption of those vitamins and minerals through our intestines isn't as effective. Our mitochondria, the power plants of our cells begin to slow down. Our muscle quality decreases. We have chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation will reduce muscle and muscle mass, and we don't sleep as well as we should sleep, right? So these are the things that cause a decline in muscle as we age. And anytime I start someone on testosterone, and anytime I start someone on a plan in my office, I get what's called an in-body body composition scan. These are amazing scans. They take a minute, and it gives you all of this data. So this is my personal data. I'm now 56 years old. I'm 6 foot tall. I'm 179 pounds, right? And I have 86 pounds of muscle and 26 pounds of body fat. So I have a 14.8% body fat. And then if you look down at the segmental lean analysis, that's how much muscle I have, right? You want to be at 100%, right? So my right arm is 114%, my left arm is 110%. So you can see I'm right-handed because I have slightly a quarter pound more muscle in my right arm than I do on my left arm. Then you can see my trunk and then my left leg and my right. And if you come in for a body composition scan, and I'll tell you at the end how you can get a free body composition scan from my office. This is the information you'll get. You'll also get what's called your basal metabolic rate. So this is a critical number, especially if you're trying to lose or gain weight, because this is your break-even point. This is the number of calories that your body burns if you're just sitting on the couch all day, right? Because you burn calories in your brain, in your liver, and your intestines, and your kidneys, and your muscles. And so that's the number of calories that you need to take in order to maintain your muscle and your weight. Okay, so now that once you know how much muscle you have, these are the critical things that you need to do. First of all, you have to optimize your testosterone levels, and we'll show you in a second why that's important. You have to exercise intelligently. I tell all my patients, be consistent and don't get hurt. If you injure yourself, you're not going to be building muscle. You're going to be atrophying muscle. You have to have adequate protein, right? You can't build muscle on donuts. Donuts are carbs. Proteins muscle is built out of protein. So if you don't take in enough protein, guess what? It doesn't matter how many hours you spend in the gym, you're not going to build adequate muscle. You have to hydrate, 2-3 liters a day. You have to sleep for 6 to 8 hours a day. And I'll show you in a second why that's so important. I put a lot of my patients on creatine. And in a second, I'll show you why creatine is important. You want to boost nitric oxide, right? Nitric oxide is essential for circulation. Nitric oxide declines as you get older. And nitric oxide is really critical for anything that requires circulation, which is really any and all bodily function. You want to be consistent and you want not to get injured. Okay. So this is just a paper that I saw that I thought was really good that summarizes the literature on the physiologic and psychologic effects of testosterone on sport performance, right? So what is the actual truth that's been proven about testosterone and sports performance? So super physiologic, right? So anything over like 1,000 is super physiologic. Doses of testosterone produce increases in fat-free muscle mass and strength, right? So high levels of testosterone increase muscle mass and strength. And then strength training plus testosterone supplementation augments the effects of testosterone on the muscle. So if you take testosterone, it helps. Testosterone plus exercise resistance training, much, much better. Long-term studies of testosterone show that it reduces body fat, right? So if you take testosterone at a higher level, you're going to reduce your body fat. Testosterone has a positive effect on the generation of muscle power, right? So studies, not just like anecdotal, like I took some testosterone, I did better, but studies, scientific studies show that you actually improve power. And this is a really important one. Studies on supraphysiologic doses of testosterone when administered to normal men in a controlled setting do not increase angry behavior, right? So if you come to my office and I get your testosterone to between 1,000 and 1,400, you're not going to snap the next time you're at a traffic stop. You're not going to snap, when you're in a difficult situation. This idea of a roid rage, that comes from guys who are getting their testosterone up to 2,000, 3,000, right? So if you're a football player in the NFL and you're making millions of dollars a year playing football, and you're playing football against other guys who are young and healthy and their testosterone are 1,000, in order to get a competitive advantage, you got to get your testosterone up to 2,000 or 3,000. And in that situation, you potentially could get a roid rage type situation. But if you're, a nice police officer and you get your testosterone up to 1,000 or 1,400, that is not going to result in angry behavior. And the last one, testosterone improves verbal fluency, but decreases spatial ability. So I'm not quite sure exactly what relevance that has, but that's what is in the literature. Okay, this is a really interesting classic study on testosterone boosting. So if you look at the first bar on the graph, that is the control group, right? Didn't work out, didn't get testosterone. Next, look at the black bar. The black bar means guys that were exercising, put on an exercise regime for 3 months. They built twice as much muscle as the control, right? Big deal. Like if you go to the gym, you're going to build muscle. But look at that now, the gray bar. The gray bar shows that the guys that were on testosterone only built almost twice as much muscle as the guys that were going to the gym, but weren't on testosterone, right? And why is this? Well, in the course of the day, you do things that require muscle strength, not necessarily working out. And so testosterone will cause increased muscle growth based on just those activities alone. But really where you want to be is the green bar, which is a combination of testosterone replacement and working out and resistance training. So, that really goes to show you that the shocking thing is that testosterone alone will improve muscle mass. And that's because testosterone is a growth factor. It's the most important growth factor for men. But if you combine testosterone and exercise, that's where it's at. Okay. Now, when you exercise, it's important to understand recovery, because when you're in the gym, you're actually not building muscle. You're tearing muscle down. So the training stimulus causes fatigue and breakdown of the muscle. Then you have to recover, and then your body super compensates. And then if you wait long enough, it's going to involute. So what you really want is a stress recovery adaptation cycle. And if you're between the ages of 15 and 35, you only need 24 to 36 hours to recover. So, for example, my son, he's 17. He's like, Dad, let's go play basketball. We go play basketball. We have a good time. We play basketball for half an hour. The next day, he's like, Dad, that was really fun. Let's go play basketball again. And I'm like, no, I can barely get up from bed, right? It takes me, because I'm 56, it takes me about 3 days to recover from that basketball game. But my son, since he's 17, the next day he's recovered. So keep in mind, your level of physical fitness, but also your age in terms of planning your recovery, right? So you don't want to do leg day 3 days in a row. You want to do leg day and then wait 2 days or 3 days and then do leg day again. That's the reason, is looking at that stress recovery adaptation cycle. Okay. The other thing is you got to eat protein, right? And we need more protein as we get older. So you need about 0.5 gram to 1 gram per pound of body weight. As a general rule, most men, I'd say, eat 100 grams of protein a day, or half your body weight in protein. And you can take a look at the picture and see what the proteins are. And in general, proteins are more difficult sources of food to get. Carbs, a donut or chocolate bar can sit around on the shelf for weeks and you can still eat it. But a piece of steak or chicken or fish, you only have a couple of days. And so that's why you have to have more effort to eat that protein. And you have to go out of your way to get the protein. But that's critical in terms of muscle building. Hydration, right? So 2/3 of our body is water. And it's a critical in terms of a number of really interesting functions. Right? If you think about it, temperature regulation, waste removal, shock absorbal, the cerebrospinal fluid that insulates your brain from shock, saliva, joint fluid, blood pressure, and the delivery of oxygen, glucose, and proteins in your body all depend on the level of hydration. So if you're relatively dehydrated, your performance is going to be significantly affected. And sleep, right? Sleep is critical. If you're working out 2 hours a day, but you're not sleeping, guess what? you're not going to build muscle, right? Muscle is built during sleep. It's really important to get 6 to 8 hours of sleep a day. Even remember, if you looked at that testosterone graph, right? Testosterone was highest first thing in the morning. It bottomed out around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and didn't start to rise till the people went to sleep. And then it rose for about 8 hours and peaked out at again at 8 o'clock in the morning, right? So it's kind of like my electric car. If I plug my electric car in for 4 hours a day, at night, I'm only going to drive it 50 or 100 miles. If I plug it in for 8 hours a day, then I'll drive it 200 miles, right? You want to be the kind of guy that can drive your body 200 miles, not 50 or 100 miles. Okay, creatine. There have been thousands of articles on creatine, right? Creatine is a very simple thing to do to continue to boost energy. And the way that it works is, if you look at the bottom right, glucose is the source of energy in our body. Glucose is combined with oxygen and produces 36 molecules of ATP. And if you look at the upper right, ATP has adenosine with 3 phosphates attached to it. And the energy of ATP is in the bonds between adenosine and phosphate. Now, when you use ATP, you release a phosphate. And when you release a phosphate, you release that energy that held the phosphate to the adenosine, and your body can use that energy to produce heat or to produce movement. That's what a calorie is, right? But then you have an ADP, so an adenosine with just 2 phosphates, and creatine helps your body grab that phosphate and stick it back onto ADP, which is why it's really important if you're working out a lot, if you're using energy, or even for brain function, right? Brains use glucose as an energy source, and glucose breaks into ATP. ATP turns into ADP, and you have to find a way to put that phosphate back onto ATP, and creatine is what does that. So 5 grams of creatine a day is kind of a no-brainer. The other thing you want to do is to boost nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is what your nerves release onto blood vessels to open up blood vessels to allow blood flow to increase. And so if you look at the picture on the left, the blood vessel is contracted. When you pour a bunch of nitric oxide onto a blood vessel, it opens up. And so I have a supplement called Affirm, which improves your body's level of nitric oxide. That improves blood flow to your brain, so you improve cognitive performance, improves blood flow to muscles, so you improve athletic performance, improves blood pressure because blood vessels are more open, improves genital function, so it improves erectile function, and it really has absolutely no side effects. So it's totally a no-brainer. And for any of the first responders that come into the office and say the secret password that'll be at the end of this presentation, you'll get a free bottle of Affirm, and you'll get an InBody, and you'll also get a copy of my comprehensive men's health book called The 21st Century Man, which is over 900 pages and 101 chapters on all aspects of men's health. Okay, so we're just going to wrap this up. Testosterone and first responders, right? You guys need more testosterone. You just do. Based on what you do, you need more testosterone to function optimally in the workplace. But the problem is, because you don't sleep as well, you don't eat as well, you don't take care of yourself as well as you should, you have a high stress job, the environment for being a policeman or a fireman or a first responder, because of COVID and because of a bunch of other political stuff that happened, it's not as good. Let's be honest. And so you have reduced testosterone production. And so it's really important that you check your levels, and you check your levels first thing in the morning. And if your levels are suboptimal and you're feeling hypogonadal, and what I mean by that is less energy, difficulty sleeping, less motivation, less libido, less muscle, more fat, lower athletic or performance, then you should consider one of the testosterone replacement options that we talked about, because the benefits include building muscle, increasing energy, improving sleep, improving mood, and better mental clarity. So thank you so much for attending this webinar on testosterone for first responders. The password that I'd like you to use when you get to my office, and this is my office, or the lounge, we call it in my office, is respect. So if you come in and you use the password, say I'm a first responder, I'm going to use the password respect. I'd like to get my free in-body scan and my free bottle of Affirm nitric oxide booster, and I'll even give you a signed copy of my book. We even do lab draws in the office. You can get your testosterone checked in my office with no hassle. And so we're located at 100 Park Place in San Ramon, a couple blocks from Home Depot. We love our first responders. We'd love to see you. Thank you very much for attending the webinar. We're going to post the webinar online. And so please tell your friends and colleagues about the webinar, because it's really important for me that our first responders understand the risks and benefits of testosterone, to understand that it can be done in a way that's super safe, that isn't high cost, and done in a way that's very responsible. So thank you very much for attending. I appreciate it.
Hey, Dr. Brandeis, do you have a second to answer a question?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So we have one question, and the question is, how long can you be on enclomiphene for?
I don't really think that there's a limit for the length of time that you're on enclomiphene. I've had patients on it for 3, 4, 5 years, and really without any problems.
Great. And then Brandon, I see that you're raising your hand, and anybody else, if you have a couple quick questions, just tap on the Q&A button. You can type them in, and we can answer or address a couple of them. There we go. Okay. Couple questions. Nice. So also curious to know if you are aware of the benefits of, and I'm going to butcher this, pregnenolone supplementation.
Pregnenolone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so pregnenolone is just a precursor to testosterone. So if we go back, so take a look at cholesterol. Cholesterol turns into pregnenolone, which then turns into DHEA, which turns into androstenedione, which turns into testosterone. So instead of pregnenolone, I have a supplement called Support, which is an oral supplement to boost testosterone. It's I think the best supplement that's out there, but it only boosts testosterone about 15 to 20%. And so there's 50 milligrams of DHEA in there. And there's also DIM, there's Tongkat Ali, which increases your free testosterone level, and ashwagandha, which boosts testosterone. But that's why people would take pregnenolone.
Perfect. Kevin asks, how do you increase FSH?
Yeah, you can either take HCG, and I don't have a slide on this, but HCG has a chemical structure that's very similar to FSH and LH. Or you can take FSH directly. The problem with directly taking FSH is it's very expensive. So HCG is in the hundreds per month. FSH is in the thousands per month.
Perfect. So Brandon asks, what's the best time to work out to lose weight?
Oh, it's a good question. What's the best time to work out to lose weight? I don't necessarily know that there's a best time to work out to lose weight. I think one of the better times to work out is in the morning, because your testosterone is naturally higher. If you're working out at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, your testosterone is naturally lower, and your workouts, sort of by definition, aren't going to be as good.
Perfect. We have, after someone starts TRT, how often do you check labs?
I check labs about every 6 months, right? So that would include, a free and total testosterone and an estrogen level, also a PSA, and then some liver function tests and a hematocrit, right? But when we do pellets, we'll typically check about a month after after the pellet placement, just to check that we're at the appropriate levels. With testosterone injection therapy, it's a little different because when you do the injection, you get a peak and then it drops. And so when you're checking labs, you check kind of a moving target. And so what I'll typically do if someone's injecting twice a week, I'll check between injections. So like day 1.5, day 2. And if someone's injecting once a week, I'll get what's called a peak and a trough. So the day after the injection and the day before the next injection, so I know how high it's going and how low it's going.
What are the potential effects if someone has high cholesterol requiring a statin to manage?
Yeah, it's really a non-issue. Statins are important. I'm on a statin. My cholesterol was like 220, and I have a family history of heart disease. I'm not on testosterone, but you can take a statin and testosterone without any problem.
What should we know about free testosterone?
Yeah, so free testosterone is really the active form of testosterone in the body. So the testicle makes testosterone, but it doesn't store testosterone. Testosterone is stored in the bloodstream. And the way that it's stored is it's bound to sex hormone binding globulin and albumin. And so really only 1 to 3% of your total testosterone is actually free and available to bind. So think about testosterone like a key, right? And that key opens up a lock. But if you take that key and you stick it into a big glob of clay, all of a sudden you're not going to be able to open up that lock. And so the free testosterone are the keys that aren't stuck into a big glob of clay. And so the sex hormone binding globulin levels in your body basically determine what your free testosterone is, but you really can't do much about how much SHBG you have. It just is. Now, there's something called Tongkat Ali, and Tongkat Ali will bind SHBG, and so it'll increase the levels of free testosterone. And so that's one strategy that we use, but that's not like a foolproof strategy. And so that's why it's important to check a free and a total. Sometimes I'll have guys that come in with a testosterone of 500 or 600, but they're having symptoms of low testosterone, and then you look at their free testosterone, it's 6. Right, so their free testosterone is only 1% of their total.
Great. Would testosterone help with nerve damage in neck and back?
That's complicated. Testosterone is a growth factor, and so it will improve, non-specifically growth. And so if you require some nerve regrowth, or bone regrowth or muscle regrowth, then it certainly would help. It's not going to be curative. The other thing is that it will strengthen the muscles that support the head. And so in that respect, it may potentially take some of the pressure off the nerves if nerve impingement is resulting from muscular weakness.
Now we have a two-parter regarding estrogen levels. So question 1 is, estrogen, from my understanding, is a neuroprotective. So are there cautions when using anastrozole if levels become too high?
Well, so you want to look at the ratio of testosterone to estrogen, right? So when I have guys on testosterone replacement, it's not unusual for them to have levels of estrogen that are higher than what's considered normal. And that's okay because it's balanced by levels of testosterone that are considered higher than normal. What you don't want is levels of estrogen that are too low, because that can affect your personality and it can affect bone health. The effects on nerves, honestly, I don't know that much about that, but I'm probably going to look that up right after we get off the webinar.
So the follow-up question is, also I've heard estrogen is important for male libido. Is that true?
Not necessarily true. I think it's much more dependent on testosterone. It's dependent on more for male sensitivity. And, it's important that we all have, when we develop as neutral, and then our body, depending on what hormones are produced, we take a turn either towards male or towards female biologic development. And so we all sort of have remnants of either male or female parts, and we both have testosterone and estrogen, just at different ratios, and we even have LH and FSH the same way that that women have.
Perfect. Okay, that's all the questions we have for now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and come by the office, use the password of respect, and we'll take good care of you.
Okay, thanks everyone.